air that keeps us alive is killing us. Poor air quality is having profound effects on our health. When will we be able to breathe easy? You're watching Roundtable with me, David Foster. Hello, very warm welcome to the programme. Now, breathing in polluted air causes infections, disease and brings about, it is thought, 7 million premature deaths a year. Now more studies are revealing in greater detail just what damage fine particles are doing to our bodies.
The World Health Organization says it's inexcusable that 90% of children are breathing toxic air. And new research is showing the damage it's doing. Early exposure to vehicle pollution increases the risk of children becoming obese. There's direct evidence of pollution particles in placentas and links with birth defects and cot deaths. And a study in China showed it can limit intelligence. If our airways continue to be clogged up, what will the long-term health effects be?
Pleased to say that joining us via Skype from York in the United Kingdom, we have Johan Kuylenstierna, Policy Director of the Stockholm Environment Institute, also on Skype, this time from New Delhi, Arvind Kumar, co-founder of the Lung Care Foundation. With me in the studio, we have Kiely, clean air campaigner at Friends of the Earth, and Liza, Selley, air pollution toxicologist at King's College London. Arvind, let's start with you, if we may. What's it like today?
It's as bad as any other day, although we are supposed to be a little better today than the previous days, but we are still in a very, very toxic area, and the breathing is actually becoming difficult. I am myself taking inhalers twice a day, and everyone in my family is presently on inhalers, and that includes my wife, my son, and my father.
I've been to New Delhi, I've been to a couple of other Indian cities, and the traffic exhaust fumes are absolutely appalling. Is it just that, or are there other reasons?
No, it's multiple reasons. So we can divide them into smoke and dust. These are the two major components. So when we look at smoke, of course, vehicles and especially diesel vehicles are a major culprit, but also contribution comes from our neighboring states where a lot of crop burning occurs. Burning of our own solid municipal waste is there. And then we have a lot of smoke coming out from coal-fired power plants and numerous other industries which exist around. So these are various sources of smoke. At the same time, we have a lot of dust which comes from roadside and also from numerous construction sites.
Can I just bring this to everybody's attention? Give us your opinion on it. I was looking at a number of different charts. Air pollutants, United States, down massively since 1970. United Kingdom, the same. By every chart I've seen, deaths per 100,000, the numbers are going down. And yet everybody says the situation's getting worse. Do you want to comment on that, Aaron?
Yeah, well, I mean, the situation is improving, and there are efforts to reduce exposure to harmful air pollution. But the reality is actually air pollution is still in a pretty terrible state, and it's actually very, very high, and it is causing an incredible amount of damage to people's health and well-being.
Is it because the damage was caused some years ago and people are now only necessarily reaping the terrible harvest of it? Or is it because we're now more aware of what the damage can be?
I think we're more aware, which is good, because then we can actually tackle the pollution at source. But absolutely, it's something that is affecting people's lives, and there's a particular impact on children and their development. And in fact, in some places in London, children are growing up with reduced lung capacity because the air they breathe around them is so filthy. That's what we're doing at the moment, currently, to the next generation.
Yeah, Johan, I'll come to you in just a minute, if I may, but I heard you sort of make a noise of assent there as Aaron was speaking, and I'd like to ask you about diesels in just a moment, because toxicology is part of your expertise, and cars in particular. But respond to what Aaron was saying there.
I completely agree with what you were saying, Aaron. in particular about the children and how it's affecting the growth of their lungs. What I was thinking about was how over time the mixture of air pollution has been changing. So it's a mixture of gases and particles, and we've had sort of different phases. We had the petrol phase, we've moved on to diesels, and the next step is to look at electric vehicles and hybrid cars, where we're going to be seeing exhaust emissions hopefully decrease, but you're still going to have particles coming from elsewhere in vehicles, like the brakes and the tyres when there's friction, and producing particles there. So what we're going to be looking at is
you've lost all the other pollutants, haven't you? The emissions from the exhaust point. But they still have tyres, they still have brakes, these old cars.
They do,
it's good that we're moving in that direction.
We're moving in a different direction, and we'll just need to look at it a bit differently, I think.
Johan, let me ask you this, and this is for anybody. Do make your point any time you want. We talk about young children. We talk about the fact that some of the causes are getting worse now, but some of the reasons for it are actually decreasing. It's partly, I would suggest, because we have a more elderly population and a larger population as well.
Well, yes, I think that one of the things is that, I think that the reduction in air pollution in this country, in the UK and across Europe, has been a remarkable success story. The trouble is, the more we know about air pollution, the more we understand that impacts occur at lower concentrations. So, as we become more knowledgeable about the impacts of air pollution on lots of different impacts that you alluded to in your film, then we realize how serious it is, even at low concentrations. And I think that one of the things I'd like to say about the situation, even in Delhi and Beijing, where they've got levels of pollution that occurred here in the 1950s, is that about half of the air pollution in the city actually comes from outside the city. So, people think that they can solve the air pollution problem just by addressing the sources in the city, but we really need to address them on a regional basis from all sorts of different sources, including agriculture.
Yeah, give us a bit more on that.
Well, one of the pollutants which we still suffer from in Europe is ammonia emissions from agriculture. And this is part of the particulate matter that we breathe in, these small particles. And this is one of the emissions which hasn't been dealt with as effectively as some of. I mean, we've been very good at reducing sulfur emissions, but we haven't addressed ammonia. And this is only just starting to be considered in Asia, where there is a high ammonia emission as well. So,
can I come back to the charts that I was talking about earlier on? If emissions of air pollutants in the United States, ammonia has been flatlining since 1990 and is now the second biggest pollutant that there is in terms of quantities.
Yes, so we have to basically broaden the efforts to reduce air pollution from these sources as well. We've been successful on some sources, but there are many sources remaining.
And I guess we're talking about ammonia and fertilizer mostly.
It's ammonia from fertilizer and manure, but yes.
You were telling me just before we started talking on the program that you were at the World Health Organization conference on this subject not so very long ago, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
What did you get from that? And then I'm going to turn it to Arvind, because you said you were impressed with what Arvind had to say. So we'll rub his back in just a moment, pat him on the shoulders, but you tell us what you got from the conference, whether anything really happened.
Well, I think it was significant because it was the first World Health Organization conference on air pollution and health. So that is significant. It's really raising the profile of this issue. And I think that what came across was just how much air pollution affects us. It affects our brain development, it affects development in the womb and even before conception. It affects, so you mentioned in your film the number of people dying annually from air pollution, both indoors and outdoors, of about 7 million. Well, there's many more people who are suffering daily from non-fatal impacts like asthma. And we did some research showing that, maybe up to 10% of visits to hospital because of asthma attacks could be attributed to particulate matter.
So what have we learned recently that we didn't know before?
So one of the newer things that we're finding out is about the ultrafine particles. So the particles that come from these sources, they're either coarse, so they're the largest ones. They're fine or they're ultrafine, and they're the ones that can go really deep into your lungs.
Where would I find these? Where would they come from to hit me?
For an example, diesel exhaust has lots of it.
Yeah.
Wood smoke, industrial fumes, lots of places can produce these ultrafine particles. And these are the ones that can get really deep in your lung, and people think they can also get into the bloodstream and go around the body, where they're going to be having effects on different organs. They've been measured in your liver and your kidneys. So there's a lot of interest now about what is happening outside of the lung with these particles.
But you see, you were talking about London, and you live in the UK, both of you. I want to ask you about the fact that in late 1940s, early 1950s, they used to have what they call pea supers in London, where the smoke would come up, the fog would sit on top of it, the smoke couldn't get out, you had what was called a smog. It was worse then, wasn't it?
I think it was a lot more visible, and you know, many lives were cut short during those really significant air pollution episodes, and they took action and they brought in the kind of, I think, the first Clean Air Act to deal with it and to actually you know, shut down lots of the I think coal-fired power stations, which had a positive impact on it. But the reality is that actually, while air pollution is probably less visible now, it's still having a significant amount of harm on people.
Again, it's perhaps because we know more.
I think so, yeah.
Right. Arvind, you were at this World Health Organization conference in Geneva. I want to ask you two things. One is what you had to say and why you felt it was important at this conference, whether anybody listened. And secondly, as an Indian yourself, isn't India to blame for what it's doing? Are you putting pressure on the government? Is anybody listening? But first of all, the conference.
Okay, first about the conference, I think it was a very significant step because it's the first time that this issue has been raised to an international level, and so many organizations came together. So it was not just WHO, United Nations Education Program, Environment Program, World Bank, and so many other units which are associated, the senior officials, the researchers, and for the first time, they involved the medical community, which means the doctors, and they were all together. So first of all, it was accepting the fact that it's a major public health problem globally. So I think that's a very significant step, number one. Number two, there was a lot of discussion about the causes, which were more clear to everybody. There was a lot of discussion about the health ill effects, and particularly on children, which is something I think which is going to affect everybody and also alter their behavior. So if you tell the person that you are getting damaged, it may have one effect, but if you tell that your children are getting damaged, I think it has far more effect. So that part was highlighted. Another significant issue was that they have identified that doctors can be real powerful advocates for clean air in various clean air campaigns globally. And that was exactly the reason why I was invited and I had a talk there. And in my talk, I'm a chest surgeon. So I showed pictures of the polluted lungs that I see. You know, when I operate, even in non-smokers these days in Delhi, I see lungs which are totally black, which earlier we used to see in smokers, but we are seeing even in teenagers now. So I showed those images, which is actually what touched people, because, you know, an image can speak more than a million words. So those images really move people that, yes, it is causing serious damage to our body. And at the end, there was a commitment session in which, starting from WHO Director General to United Nations Environment Program, World Bank, and nearly 70 governments, individuals, groups, and NGOs made commitments to work in this field.
Well, we all know about the commitments of governments when they're at conferences, donor conferences. They say we're going to do this, they say we're going to do that, and of course it very often comes to nothing. You say 70 governments were there. No. I wonder what the response of the 70 countries, I think you said, were at this final meeting. Have I got that wrong?
No, I said there were total 70 commitments, which were from, some were governments, some were individuals, some were associations, various non-governmental organizations, like that. Total
Okay,
70
but
people
what about your own government, India? Because it sort of seems to, the suggestion has always been, look, we're playing catch up with the rest of the world. The rest of the world's done this for a long, long time. If we're going to bring our economy into the 21st century, we have to do it the old-fashioned way because we can't afford to do it any other way. Is it going to change in India?
As a doctor who's been seeing the effect and who has also been traveling across the country to highlight the problems of air pollution across the country, my first impression about India is that even today, majority of our population has actually not realized the serious ill effects which pollution is causing. They are not aware of the amount of damage it is causing to the health. And for me as a doctor, and I think for the whole doctor community, the first challenge is to bring these to the notice of people.
That is the position of the little man, little woman, the person who has very little power in terms of influence, but the big multinational down the road that's burning fossil fuels and the government that's getting massive taxes from these people. Are they listening worldwide? Anybody?
Well, I think fundamentally, if we are going to deal with the air pollution problem, and I can talk a bit about the UK situation, it will require massive amounts of investment and fundamentally changing us away from a culture of everything is done by car and actually getting people into high quality, affordable public transport will help with the problem. You know, improving cycling and walking facilities. You know, we can't just carry on saying more and more cars on the road. We've seen a massive increase over the years in car ownership, and that has got to decline if we're going to deal with the biggest problem and the thing that is causing illegal levels of air pollution in many of our towns and cities.
Yeah, Liza, were you surprised when you were doing your PhD and all the follow-up stuff with the attitudes of some people to this? Not the individual.
I think it's difficult because with this, you do need to find a balance. People do need to get to work. We do need to have industry. And so people want to improve the air quality, but we also need to get things done.
Are manufacturers listening to the evidence and changing their ways also?
So there's been a few ways that they're looking at it. People have looked at using different materials for the brakes. We know metals, for example, are really toxic. So there are braking systems that can be made with low metal content.
They're looking at it. Are they going to do anything?
They are in use.
It?
They are in use.
Yeah?
It depends on the vehicle that you're using.
But I suppose what I'm trying to get at is where does the pressure come from to make these changes?
Has to come from people
Yeah.
who are increasingly aware of the problem and raising up the agenda and making sure that politicians act, that businesses can't get away with what they're currently doing. You know, many of them lied about the pollution that was being caused by their vehicles. Remember kind of the Dieselgate scandal, and that was kind of across Europe.
Diesel was brilliant for a long time, wasn't
Absolutely.
it? Everybody thought, hey, here we go.
Until we found out more.
Yeah. And you know, but actually, I will say, Friends of the Earth did warn about this in the late 90s when the
to blame for the fact that my car is now worth a great deal less.
No. Well,
Yeah, maybe.
yes, I will take some of that.
Well, no, it's great that you've put that out there. Johan, can I come to you, or indeed anybody on this one? I'm looking at a world map here which says death rate from ambient particulate air pollution per 100,000. It's a right and left map, effectively. Africa and Asia, really badly polluted. And then you look at the Western Hemisphere, if you like, and it's not so bad in terms of the death rates. But one thing in particular struck me is there are countries where there aren't many cars. There isn't a great deal of manufacturing, not an awful lot of obvious pollution. Afghanistan being one of them, where the death rates are incredibly high. And this is down to the paucity of health services. Am I right?
I'm not sure. Well, I mean, the maps that you're looking at are the response of people to the air pollution. And so the issue is where the air pollution is worse. Now, one of the issues that you have in Africa and Asia, which you don't have in Europe as much, are the poorest people cooking on biomass. So they have extremely high particles concentrations indoors, and so that's affecting mainly women and children as well.
You talking about little camping stoves and things like that?
Well, I mean, there are alternatives.
And wood fires.
LPG stoves, for example, they're used mainly in the urban centres in Asia and Africa. They can become more widespread, and there are many countries. So one of the things that you asked before about, well, what are politicians doing anything about it? I mean, certainly in China, air pollution is one of the top political issues, which the senior politicians are talking about all the time, a lot of that has come from pressure from people who don't want to live in such polluted environments. And when you talked about those pea supers, I remember being in a meeting in Beijing where somebody showed a slide of London in 1952, and I looked out the window and I thought it looked rather similar. So, you know, for the last meeting I was at in China a few weeks ago, the leadership are very pleased that they say that the PM2.5 concentration has decreased by 25%. That's nowhere near good enough, but people are trying very hard. But there are different issues in different countries: indoor air pollution, cooking with biomass. There are 3 billion people worldwide.
So, sorry, when you say biomass, just treat me as the ignorant inquisitor here. I mean, you're talking about what?
Well, it's bits of wood, anything to cook your food on. So it can be wood, it can be dung, it can be crop residues. And so partly, you know, often girls and women have to spend a lot of their day finding the fuel, and then they inhale the smoke afterwards, and it causes a huge number of health impacts.
We're going to go into what's being done about it in a subsequent episode of Roundtable, and I know 3 of you are staying with me for that one. But what I'm actually wondering at the moment is, as we come towards the end, we know much more about it now, and therefore we are aware, but also scared. Are we sometimes scared unnecessarily? I'm looking at you, Liza, because you live in London, you have to get up, you have to go to work.
I don't think we are scared unnecessarily.
Isn't there always something to worry about?
But this is damaging people's health. This is causing fatalities, many, many fatalities each year. And it is something that we can approach and deal with. So I don't think, no, we're not scared necessarily.
Okay, and do you believe in the effect of the minority that could shout loudest? In other words, as Johan was saying, in China, the people are putting pressure on the politicians to change. Do you think that sort of change is coming? And this is one for you also, because Friends of the Earth is a pressure group.
I think, look at what happened with microplastics as a recent example. More and more people shared stories about how plastics were getting into the ocean, how they were ending up in our food. And around that time, we had new policies coming in, the 5p payment for carrier bags, things like that. And so by people talking about the issue, an environmental issue that affects people, just like air pollution, we did encourage a change to come about.
Okay, so, and Friends of the Earth, you reckon you're being listened to? Not just by the people who you're preaching to the converted, if you like, but others as well?
I think increasingly so. And when I think of air pollution, I do think of powerful stories like the story of Ella Roberta, who was a young girl who lived in South London, in one of the most polluted places in the UK, and one of the most polluted places, in fact, in Europe. And she suffered from severe asthma. And one day she had a fatal asthma attack, and she was only 8 or 9 years old, and her mother is now campaigning for justice to actually say, hang on a minute, was there something about the awful air pollution that day that could have triggered that fatal asthma attack? So it's really real, and many people are aware to those kind of stories.
Shall we throw that to Arvind, who's leaving us after this episode? Yeah, what about the damage that you see, apart from the smoke particles, etc., etc.? Tell us what the biggest lesson you'd like people to take away from this is.
The biggest lesson I want people to take away is that it's not something that we are unnecessarily scared of. Air pollution and its health ill effects are a major health problem today. At least for our country, I can say that it's a national health emergency. When we have PM 2.5 levels of 250, 300, 400, 500, I think it's this air is unfit for human habitation.
And I think I looked at the map today. Delhi is 300 plus, and there's another big city in India, I couldn't see its name, that is 500 plus. So the damage is out there.
Yes, very much out there. It's causing serious damage from our children to our elderly. Everybody is being affected. And I look forward to the day where it becomes a people's movement, and people say that to the politicians that if you don't fix this problem, we won't vote for you.
Are we getting there?
I think we'll get there one day.
Okay, and it's programs like this and people like you that I hope will make the voices heard. Thank you very much indeed. Quick word from you in terms of where you go next and the work you're doing. What follows on from the brake and the diesel particles, etc., etc.
Well, there's still a big way to go with the non-exhaust particles. Not so many people hear about them, not so many people research their effects. So I'm trying to improve that, increase people's awareness that they are there and that we do need to find ways to fight them. OK, and we will discover more about that in a second part of this air pollution programme. I know that you're staying on, Aaron, and Johan also. Arvind, thank you very much indeed, and good luck with all the work that you're doing and the fact that you're bringing it to a great many people's attention. We talked about New Delhi, we talked about the particle map that showed that New Delhi was very, very dodgy today. I've had a quick look at this map here and it shows me that pretty much the only safe place to go is the Brazilian rainforest, and there's less and less of that available, as we know, almost every single day. Thank you very much for taking part. We will be back with another show on air pollution. This has been The Damage It Causes. The next one will be What Can We Do About It, and what is being done about it. From me, David Foster, from my guests. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.